The look on my uncle's face when he realized the folder in front of him wasn't a routine estate pack, it was honestly worth every fake smile I'd forced for 3 straight weeks. He had one hand on his water glass, the other already reaching for the papers like they belonged to him. That was Vernon, always early to grab what wasn't his. His wife Denise was sitting beside him in a cream blouse that probably cost more than my monthly electric bill, smiling that polished church lady smile she used whenever she was about to say something cruel in a soft voice. Then Vernon read the first page, and the color left his face so fast I almost checked the thermostat. I'm Naomi. I was 33 when all of this happened, and up until that dinner, I still had a bad habit of assuming family meant safe. It doesn't. Sometimes it just means they know where the spare key is. Before I get into it, subscribe if you like stories, where patience does the heavy lifting, and tell me where you're watching from. I always read the comments later with tea like somebody's auntie. And give me one word in the comments, receipts, because this story would have gone very differently without mine. Now let me back up. At the time, I was working as a compliance coordinator for a regional dental network in Savannah, Georgia. Not glamorous, but stable. I spent my days reading policy updates, fixing paperwork mistakes other adults somehow kept making, and sending emails that began with per my previous message. So, yes, I was already halfway to becoming the exact woman nobody should underestimate. I lived alone in a one-bedroom apartment off Abercorn Street with a dying ficus, a beige couch I kept meaning to replace, and a blue ceramic sugar bowl my grandmother left me when she passed. That sugar bowl matters, by the way. My grandmother believed every woman should have one thing in her house nobody else touched. Not because it was expensive, because it was hers. She used to say, a person's real character shows when they think your kindness has made you easy to move. I didn't fully understand that when I was 12. By 33, I understood it down to the bone. My mother died when I was 19. My grandfather had been gone long before that. So the center of our family for years was my grandmother Eloise and then later my stepfather Martin. He wasn't technically related to most of my mother's side, but he'd been with her since I was 9, and he was the one who stayed. He came to every awful high school choir concert. He taught me how to check my tire pressure. He sent me grocery money in college without making it a speech. He also owned a small commercial property portfolio with my mother before she passed. Nothing flashy. 3 rental storefronts, 1 duplex, and a narrow brick building on East Broad that had a tax office downstairs and 2 apartments upstairs. Boring assets, the kind that quietly keep a family afloat if people behave themselves. After my mother died, Martin kept everything running, slowly, carefully. He was a retired postal operations manager, which meant he believed in labels, order, and writing things down. I loved him for that. He kept file boxes with dates on them in his hallway closet, as he still balanced a check register with an actual pen. He distrusted apps. Frankly, I respected the commitment. My uncle Vernon was my mother's younger brother. He sold himself as the business-minded one in the family, which was interesting because every business idea he had somehow required someone else's credit, labor, or living room. He had a way of talking with complete confidence while saying things that made no practical sense at all. People who didn't know better found him charming. People who did know better kept their wallets zipped. Denise was worse in a quieter way. Vernon would bulldoze. Denise would sandpaper. She never outright insulted me. That would have been easier to deal with. Instead, she specialized in little polished cuts. You're still renting? Well, flexibility is nice. You always were such a serious girl. Naomi's very capable, Martin, but property matters can be complicated. Complicated. My favorite word used by mediocre people trying to guard basic information. Still, for years, things stayed manageable because Martin kept Vernon at arm's length. Family dinners twice a month, major holidays, the occasional argument about repairs or taxes, nothing I couldn't chalk up to ordinary family friction. Then Martin had a mild stroke on April 14th. I remember the date because I was in the office reviewing vendor contracts at 2:14 p.m. when St. Joseph's called me. The woman on the phone spoke with that very calm hospital voice people use when they know your day is about to split in half. By 3:02 p.m., I was in the emergency department, still wearing my badge lanyard and one earring because I'd lost the other somewhere between my desk and the parking garage. Martin survived, thank God. He was weak, shaken, and furious about it in that very specific way older men get when their own body embarrasses them. The doctor said he'd need monitoring, medication adjustments, lower stress, and help at home for a while. That should have been simple. I was already spending 4 evenings a week with him. I could have arranged remote work for a couple of days each week and hired a daytime aide. I had spreadsheets in my head by the second day. I am not saying that proudly. I'm saying that's how my brain works under pressure. Some people cry first. I opened tabs, but Vernon stepped in fast. Too fast. At the family meeting 3 days later, he leaned forward at Martin's dining table and said, Naomi has a demanding job. She can't do all this alone. Denise and I should move in temporarily, just until he's back on his feet. Temporarily. That word should have had police lights on it. Martin looked tired. Denise had made chicken and dumplings and placed them in front of him like she was auditioning to be canonized. I could see him wavering, and I hated that I could see it. Recovery makes people vulnerable in ways pride never prepared them for. I said we could bring in licensed home health support. Vernon waved that off immediately. You don't need strangers in the house, he said. This is family. I didn't argue hard enough then. I should have. I know that now, but Martin squeezed my hand under the table and said, just for a little while, sweetheart. That was the moment the floor started shifting. By May 2nd, Vernon and Denise had moved into Martin's house in Bluffton, South Carolina, just across from the marsh on a quiet street where everybody knew too much about everybody else. They brought 6 garment bags, a juicer nobody asked for, and an attitude like they were doing the Lord's work. At first, I told myself maybe this would help. That lie lasted about 9 days. The first thing that changed was access. Martin and I used to talk every night around 8:30. Nothing dramatic. We'd discuss dinner, his blood pressure numbers, some ridiculous thing a tenant had done, whether the Braves had embarrassed themselves again. Suddenly, every call started getting intercepted. Denise would answer and lower her voice. He's asleep. At 8:30, Vernon would text instead. Long day. He needs rest. Then there were the missed visits. The first Sunday in May, and I brought over tomato basil soup from the Collins Quarter and a stack of insurance forms Martin needed to sign. Vernon met me on the porch and said Martin had finally fallen asleep after a rough morning and shouldn't be disturbed. I said I'd wait. He said that wasn't necessary. I said I'd leave the forms. He said he'd handle them. I remember exactly what he said next. You worry too much, Naomi. That's your problem. I filed that away. 2 days later, I stopped by after work at 6:17 p.m. Denise opened the door just enough to block the entry with her body. She smiled like a bank manager denying a loan. He's in the bath, she said. Martin had never taken an evening bath in the 24 years I'd known him. The man treated soaking like a personal insult. Still, I smiled. I handed over a pharmacy bag and left. In the car, I sat with both hands on the steering wheel and thought that was weird. That phrase became my whole internal soundtrack for a while. That was weird. Why did Vernon suddenly need copies of the rent deposits? Why did Denise ask which attorney drafted Martin's updated deed language? Why did Martin stop answering his own cell phone? Why were 2 of my emails about the East Broad building suddenly answered from Vernon's address instead of Martin's? Nothing big enough on its own. Just a trail of little things. And if you've ever been the woman in a family who notices patterns before anybody else, then you already know how that goes. They don't call you observant, they call you sensitive. Around mid-May, my friend Celia came over with takeout from a Thai place near Darren Avenue and found me sitting at my kitchen table with my laptop open, staring at 3 unanswered texts from Martin's phone. Celia had been my best friend since community college. She worked in medical billing, had the patience of a saint, and the mouth of a dock worker when necessary. Exactly the kind of friend every woman needs at least once in her life. She set the food down, looked at my face, and said, "What happened?" I told her everything. The blocked calls, the porch conversations, the weird document questions, the way Vernon kept saying we when referring to Martin's assets, the fact that Denise, who had never shown curiosity about anything more taxing than table linens, now suddenly had opinions about lease renewals. Celia listened without interrupting. Then she opened her pad thai, took one bite, and said, "I'm going to say this nicely first. They're not helping. They're positioning." I didn't say anything at first because that was the sentence I had been trying not to form in my own mind. Celia pointed her plastic fork at me. "And before you do that thing where you explain their behavior better than they earn, don't." That's why she's my friend. Not because she tells me what I want to hear, because she tells me the truth before it gets expensive. After that, I started keeping notes. Nothing dramatic. Just dates, times, who said what when I was turned away, which documents Vernon requested, what Martin did or didn't respond to. I'm a compliance coordinator. Documenting suspicious behavior is basically my love language. May 19th. Vernon requested tenant payment summaries. May 22nd. Denise asked if Martin had ever cleaned up the beneficiary designations. May 24th, 8:43 p.m. Call answered by Denise. Jung said Martin was sleeping. Background noise sounded like television and ice clinking in a glass. May 27th. Martin texted only. Tired. Call later. No later call came. Then on June 3rd, something happened that I still think about. Martin was admitted to the hospital after what Vernon described as a dizzy spell. That phrase ended up doing a lot of dishonest work. The reality, according to the nurse practitioner I cornered in the hallway, was that Martin had been dehydrated, disoriented, and had a dangerous medication inconsistency in his chart. She didn't say overdose. She didn't say negligence. She didn't have to. I heard the shape of the problem anyway. When I got to the hospital, Vernon was standing by the vending machines drinking black coffee like he was inconvenienced by the whole thing. If Denise had one of Martin's file folders in her tote bag, that file folder should not have been with her. I noticed that before I even took my next breath. I asked where Martin's glasses were. Vernon shrugged. I asked what medications he'd taken that morning. Denise said, "We followed the instructions." We, again. That night, I sat beside Martin's bed listening to the monitor beep while he slept, pale and too still, and I had the strangest feeling that I was late to something, not physically, spiritually, like whatever was happening had started before I was willing to name it. A little after 9 p.m., a night nurse came in to check his IV line. Her badge said Renata. Mid-50s maybe, sharp eyes, no nonsense. She looked at Martin, then at me, then toward the hallway. And in a very quiet voice, she said, "Oh, who manages his medications at home?" I said, "My uncle and his wife right now. Why?" She didn't answer directly. She adjusted the blanket, pressed something on the monitor, and said just as quietly, "If I were you, I'd stop taking anyone's word for anything." Then she walked out. I sat there for a full 10 seconds with my hand on the rail of the bed. I remember exactly how cold it felt. That was the moment. I didn't know everything yet, but I knew enough. And once I knew enough, I stopped being the nice, understanding niece they thought they could keep on the porch. I went home that night, pulled my grandmother's blue sugar bowl down from the shelf, and opened it. Inside was the spare key Martin had once insisted I keep, and Denise had specifically asked about 2 weeks earlier. I'd told her I didn't have one. That was my first good decision, and it would not be my last. The next morning, I put on navy slacks, a white blouse, and the blandest face I owned. That sounds dramatic, but women know exactly what I mean. There is a facial expression you wear when you need people to keep underestimating you. Pleasant, slightly tired, no sparks, no alarms. I deserved an Oscar for that week. Before work, I stopped at Maple Street Coffee, bought a large drip and a lemon muffin for Denise, and drove straight to Martin's house like I was the world's most supportive stepdaughter. Denise opened the door in pale pink activewear she had never once exercised in, and I handed her the bag. She blinked. That told me she'd expected tension. Good. "I thought you might need breakfast," I said. "How's Martin?" Her whole body relaxed by about half an inch. "He's resting." "Yes, it was a long night." Of course it was. She'd been busy. Vernon came in from the den buttoning a golf shirt like he had a 10 o'clock tea time instead of a family crisis. He gave me that patronizing half-smile men use when they think a woman has decided to stay manageable. I smiled right back. I asked about Martin's follow-up appointments. I asked whether they needed me to pick up groceries. I even apologized if I'd seemed stressed at the hospital. That part tasted like chalk. Vernon actually patted my shoulder. "See, this is better," he said. "We're all on the same page now." I almost laughed in his face. Instead, I said, "I know you're trying to do what's best." That sentence should have earned me a medal. They let me see Martin for less than 10 minutes. He looked groggy, thinner, and strangely distant. It's like somebody had wrapped cotton around his usual sharpness. His reading glasses were missing. So was the yellow legal pad he always kept by his chair. Denise answered every question directed at him before he could finish the first word. How's your appetite? He barely ate. Did the doctor change anything? We have the list. Do you want me to come by after work? He needs quiet. Martin did squeeze my hand once before I left. Hard enough to mean something, not hard enough for me to decode it. Outside, I sat in my car with the AC blasting and texted Celia. I'm not crazy. She wrote back in under 30 seconds. I know, want me to leave early? That's another reason I love her. No speech, no maybe, just logistics. We met that night at my apartment with my laptop, a spiral notebook, two turkey sandwiches, and the kind of determination that usually ends with someone crying in a law office. I showed her my notes. She read every line. Then she looked up and said, okay, two things. One, they're isolating him. Two, if his meds are off, none of this is small anymore. I said what I'd been avoiding all day. What if they're trying to get him declared incompetent? Celia went quiet. That silence told me I'd landed close to something ugly. Because once someone is seen as confused, weak, unreliable, or unable to manage their own affairs, people with the right signatures can do a lot of damage while calling it help. And Vernon loved nothing more than wrapping greed in concern. I barely slept that night. At 1:12 a.m., I was still awake, staring at my ceiling fan, hearing Renata's voice in my head. Stop taking anyone's word for anything, so I didn't. Up the next day was June 4th, and I took a personal day from work for the first time in 11 months. My manager approved it in 6 minutes because apparently sounding like your soul has left the building helps. At 8:40 a.m., I drove to Martin's pharmacy in Bluffton. I wasn't sure they'd tell me anything, but I knew one thing about long-term local pharmacies. If they know your family, they sometimes say more with their face than their mouth. The pharmacist on duty was a man named Mr. Bledsoe, who'd known Martin for years. He was polite, careful, and very aware of privacy rules. I introduced myself, explained I was helping organize Martin's follow-up care after the hospital, and asked whether there had been any recent changes to his prescriptions. He gave me the standard answer first. No, I can only discuss certain details with the patient or authorize individuals. Fair enough. Then I asked a better question. Has anyone besides Martin been picking up his medications over the last month? He hesitated. Not long. Maybe 2 seconds. But I saw it. He said, family members have assisted. Yes? I asked if all refills had been picked up on schedule. He said, there were some early refill questions. Questions. Another word doing dishonest work. I thanked him and left. In the parking lot, I wrote that down immediately. June 4th, pharmacy confirmed family pickups and early refill issues. Then I drove to Martin's house while Vernon and Denise were supposedly at his cardiology appointment. I used the spare key from the sugar bowl and let myself in through the side door near the laundry room. I know somebody will ask whether I felt guilty. No, not even a little. The house smelled like lemon cleaner and Denise's vanilla diffuser oil, which had already started bothering me on a moral level. Martin's home used to smell like coffee, cedar, and whatever soup was in progress. Now it smelled staged. I moved quickly. First, I checked the kitchen drawer where Martin kept his pill receipts and appointment summaries. Half empty, then his desk in the den, and the top drawer had been rearranged. His file tabs were out of order. That may not sound important unless you've ever known a man who filed warranty papers from 2009 alphabetically. Martin was many things. Random was not one of them. In the second drawer, I found a manila envelope labeled insurance. Inside were photocopies of 2 property tax notices, a rent roll printout, and one unsigned power of attorney template downloaded from the internet. I read it twice, not because it was complicated, because I wanted to be sure my rage was fact-based. The document named Vernon as agent. It wasn't executed, no signature, no notary, just printed and ready. That was enough. He'd already been preparing. I took photos of every page with my phone, exactly aligned, front and back, where necessary. Compliance brain. Once that switch flips, I become deeply annoying and very effective. Next, I went upstairs. Martin's bedroom looked normal at first glance. Bed made, water glass on the nightstand, Bible on the dresser. The pill organizer was there too, a clear plastic weekly box with blue letters for each day. Thursday's compartment was empty. It was Tuesday. That made the back of my neck go cold. Now I opened the bathroom cabinet. Blood pressure medication, cholesterol medication, a bottle of low dose aspirin, and then behind the shaving cream, an orange prescription vial with a label that had been partially peeled back. That is never innocent. I took it into the light. The label underneath had Martin's name, but the top label had been placed over it crookedly with a slightly different dosage instruction. Same pharmacy, same medication class, different strength. My hands actually shook then, not in a theatrical way, in the deeply practical way your body reacts when your mind is trying to catch up. I took photos, then I checked the refill date. It didn't line up with the hospital timeline. That was when I heard a car outside. I froze, a door slammed. Voices. I tucked the bottle back exactly where I found it, closed the cabinet. I stepped into the guest room across the hall just as the front door opened downstairs. Denise's laugh floated up first. Vernon said something about traffic and whether she bought it. She, me. Good to know. I stood in that guest room between an ironing board and a floral bedspread from 1998 while my own pulse tried to file for separation. They were not supposed to be back that early. I checked my phone. 10:23 a.m. Then I heard Denise say, clear as day, she looked calmer today. I think the hospital scared her. Vernon laughed. Naomi likes paperwork. Let her organize soup schedules or whatever. She's not the issue. I wish I could tell you I had some cool internal reaction to that. I didn't. I just stood there thinking, you arrogant idiot, because that sentence gave me something better than satisfaction. It gave me proof of mindset. Now, he didn't think I was a threat. That would become very useful. They moved around downstairs for a few minutes. Cabinet doors opened. A chair scraped. Then Vernon said he was going back out because he'd forgotten his laptop bag in the car. I did not have time for that. The guest room had a back staircase leading down to the mudroom. Old house feature. Bless every architect who ever anticipated family mess. I slipped off my shoes, went down silently, and let myself out the side door with my heels in one hand like some sort of deeply annoyed raccoon. I was in my car and halfway down the street before my hands stopped trembling. At 11:06 a.m., I parked behind a Publix, called Celia, and told her everything. She didn't interrupt once. When I finished, she said, okay, listen carefully. That you need a lawyer before you need a confrontation. Exactly right. My grandmother used to say, never give a liar advance notice. All it does is help them rehearse. So I didn't call Vernon. I didn't accuse Denise. I didn't tell Martin what I'd found over the phone in case they were monitoring his calls. Instead, I called Martin's longtime attorney, Eleanor Pike, whose office had handled property matters for him for years. I got her assistant first, then Eleanor herself at 11:34 a.m. I told her it was urgent and family-related and asked if I could come by in person with documentation. She told me 2:30 p.m. I was there at 2:07. Eleanor was in her early 60s, silver bob, navy suit, and the kind of calm that makes foolish men accidentally confess. Her office smelled like paper, lemon polish, and expensive boundaries. And I laid out the photos, the power of attorney template, the medication label images, my written timeline, the hospital note dates, the pattern of isolation, the pharmacy concern, everything. She read in total silence for nearly 12 minutes. Then she took off her glasses and said, has Martin signed anything recently in your presence? No. Has he seemed fully oriented every time you've seen him? Not fully. Tired, slower, but not incapable? And do Vernon and Denise have physical access to his mail, medications, records, and house? Yes. She nodded once. That was all. Then she said the sentence that changed the whole shape of the next month. We are not dealing with a misunderstanding. I felt something in me settle when she said that. Not because it made me happy. Because clear language is a mercy when people have been trying to fog your mind. Eleanor explained it plainly. If Vernon was attempting to secure authority over Martin through coercion, confusion, or manipulated incapacity, that was serious. If there had been medication tampering, that was more serious. And if property records or trust assets were already being accessed improperly, we needed to lock things down fast and quietly. Quietly mattered. Because if Vernon got spooked too early, he might move money, destroy documents, or push Martin into signing something before we could intervene. I asked what we needed first. Eleanor began making a list in blue ink. 1. Independent medical evaluation of Martin's decision-making capacity once he was stable. 2. Immediate review of all recent account activity and property records. 3. Confirmation of whether any legal instruments had been drafted, executed, or presented elsewhere. 4. Safe, direct contact with Martin without Vernon or Denise present. 5. Documentation of the medication discrepancies by a physician or pharmacist. That was the plan. Real, boring, beautiful plan. Not revenge. Structure. Before I left, Eleanor looked me dead in the face and said, Naomi, from this point on, assume every word you say to Vernon may be used to speed up whatever he's trying to do. I understand. No emotional speeches, no warnings, no scenes. I almost smiled. You say that like I'm tempted. She gave me the slightest look over her glasses. Everyone is tempted. Fair point. From there, I drove to the hospital to see Renata, though I wasn't sure she'd even be on shift. She was. She recognized me immediately. I stepped into the hallway with me near the nurse's station and kept her voice low. I told her I had concerns about medication management at home and asked whether Martin's chart reflected any discrepancy. She was careful. She could not hand me records or speculate outside protocol, but she did say this. The medication list provided on admission did not match the blood levels we would have expected. I felt my stomach drop. Could that happen by accident? I asked. She held my gaze for 1 second too long. Many things can happen by accident, she said. That was nurse language for, I'm not saying this on paper, but no. Before I left, she touched my arm and said, move faster than they expect. I did. That evening, I went back to Martin's house for a scheduled dinner visit because routine was now part of strategy. Denise made baked salmon, an over-seasoned asparagus, and a point of mentioning how exhausted she was from managing everything. Vernon poured himself wine in Martin's kitchen and talked about long-term solutions in that oily, reasonable voice he used when he wanted something ugly to sound responsible. At some point, he said, we may need to simplify things. Too many properties, too many documents, too much strain on Martin. Simplify. Another liar's favorite word. I cut my asparagus and said, that makes sense. Both of them looked at me, not because I challenged them, because I hadn't. That's the thing about manipulative people. They're so used to managing resistance that cooperation makes them sloppy. Denise actually relaxed enough to start talking. She mentioned possibly consolidating accounts. I said Eleanor Pike was probably too old school for modern planning. Floated the idea of using a different attorney Vernon knew through some business contact in Hilton Head. I nodded like I was taking in wisdom from the mountaintop. Inside, I was writing every word in permanent ink. Martin barely spoke during dinner, but twice I caught him looking at me strangely, not confused, searching, as if he knew something was wrong but couldn't see the edges of it yet. When I stood to leave, I bent to kiss his forehead and quietly slipped a folded note into the pocket of his cardigan. 3 words. Say nothing yet. He gave me the smallest blink. That was enough. In the driveway, Vernon walked me to my car, smiling like a man who thought he had finally restored control. He leaned one arm on the roof and said, yeah, I'm glad you're being sensible about all this. I looked at him and said very calmly, I'm learning a lot. He smiled wider. He thought that meant he was teaching me. He had no idea. By the end of that week, I knew 3 things for certain. First, this was not about caregiving. Second, Vernon and Denise had already begun preparing paperwork to take control. Third, Martin's weakness was being used as cover. What I didn't know yet was how far they'd already gone. I found that out on Friday, June 7th at 4:48 p.m. when Celia called me while I was still at my desk and said, don't react out loud. I just found something. My entire body went still. Celia had a cousin named Aaron who worked in records administration for Beaufort County. Not illegally, not secretly. Just one of those men who knows how public filings work and enjoys being useful when somebody actually deserves it. She had asked him a general question about whether any recent property-related documents had been indexed under Martin's name. There had been not recorded deeds, not yet. But there was a scheduled consultation note attached to a conservatorship intake inquiry filed by a private elder law practice in Bluffton. The requesting family contact? Vernon Hale. I stared at my computer screen so hard the words blurred. Conservatorship. He was trying to get legal control over Martin by presenting him as unable to manage his own affairs. Not later, not maybe, already. That was the hidden truth sitting underneath all the politeness, all the casseroles, all the soft-voiced concern. They weren't waiting for Martin to die. They were preparing for him to be declared helpless. And once that happened, everything else would be easier for them. The accounts, the leases, the property decisions, the signatures, the story. I didn't say anything for a long moment. Then Celia said very quietly, "Naomi?" I swallowed and asked, "What date was the intake?" Her answer made my blood run cold. May 21st. 3 days before Denise asked me whether Martin had cleaned up his beneficiary designations. 3 days before Vernon told me I worried too much. 3 days before they started pushing harder to intercept every call. That wasn't panic. That was a plan. And now I finally knew what shape it was. I went home, took off my shoes, sat at my kitchen table, and spread out every note, photo, date, and name I had. Then I put my grandmother's blue sugar bowl beside the stack and looked at it for a long time. A person's real character shows when they think your kindness has made you easy to move. I said that out loud to my empty apartment. Then I opened a fresh notebook and wrote one sentence across the top of the page. Let him build it. Because Vernon was making a mistake men like him always make. He thought the danger was in what I knew. It wasn't. The danger was in what he was about to do next, believing nobody important was watching. From that point on, everything I did had two versions, the one they saw and the real one. On the surface, I became the most cooperative relative Vernon could have asked for. I brought groceries, I texted updates, I asked Denise if she needed help organizing Martin's pill schedule, which almost made her choke on her own fake kindness. Underneath, I was working off the list Eleanor Pike wrote in blue ink. Every step mattered, every detail mattered. And the biggest rule was the one she repeated twice before I left her office. Do not confront him early. People think strength is yelling when you find out someone lied to you. Real strength is smiling while you collect enough proof that the lie can't survive daylight. The first thing we needed was a clean medical evaluation of Martin without Vernon or Denise hovering like stage managers. That turned out to be harder than it should have been, which told me we were absolutely on the right track. Every appointment suddenly had to be rescheduled. Every follow-up was already handled. Every time I asked for the doctor's name, Vernon said, "We've got it covered." Covered. At another one of those words that sounds helpful and usually isn't. So Eleanor handled it. She contacted Martin directly through certified mail, which Vernon couldn't intercept without committing a crime he was too careful to risk. The letter requested Martin come to her office to review some routine property tax questions related to the East Broad building. Routine was the key word. Martin trusted routine. The appointment was set for June 12th at 10 a.m. Vernon had no idea. That same week, I started digging through the financial side, not illegally, not secretly, just methodically, the way my grandmother used to go through coupons on Sunday afternoon like she was balancing the national budget. Martin had always let me help with rent spreadsheets during tax season, so I already knew where most of the records lived. The problem was that now Vernon had started organizing things, which meant papers had moved and some files had disappeared. That irritated me more than the betrayal, honestly. Messy paperwork is disrespectful. On June 9th, I went over to the house with a box of bakery muffins and asked Denise if I could update the tenant contact list for Martin so he wouldn't have to worry about it. She loved that. Nothing makes controlling people happier than thinking you've accepted your role as the helpful one. She handed me the key to the file cabinet herself. If I live to be 90, I will never forget that moment. I sat at the dining table with a legal pad, copying names, addresses, lease dates, and quietly taking photos of every statement, every deposit summary, every maintenance invoice I hadn't seen before. There were small things at first, as a late fee that hadn't been recorded, a repair charge paid twice, a missing rent entry from one of the upstairs apartments. Nothing explosive, just wrong. Then I found the trust account summary. Martin had a separate account for property income, and he balanced it monthly like it was a religion. The last full statement in his handwriting was from March. After that, the notes changed. Different pen, different handwriting, different math. I compared March to April, then April to May. 2 withdrawals in May that I did not recognize, $4,800, $7,250, both labeled maintenance. Neither had an invoice attached. My heart started beating so hard I could hear it in my ears, but I kept my face exactly the same. Denise was in the kitchen talking on the phone about church committee decorations, while I sat there documenting the careful way Vernon had started dipping into money he thought nobody was watching. I wrote the amounts down, then I wrote the dates, then I closed the folder and asked Denise if she wanted me to alphabetize the tenant list. She smiled like I'd just confirmed everything she believed about me. Yes, that would help so much. If she ever watches this, I hope she remembers handing me that cabinet key. That night, I went straight to Eleanor's office and spread everything out again. She didn't react emotionally. She never did. She just lined up the statements in order and said, "He's testing the boundaries." "What does that mean?" I asked. "It means he's already acting like he has authority he doesn't legally have yet." That sentence made my stomach drop, because that meant the conservatorship inquiry wasn't a backup plan, it was the main plan. As if Vernon could get Martin declared unable to manage his affairs, those withdrawals could be explained away as necessary expenses. If he couldn't, they were theft. Eleanor tapped the paper with her pen. "We keep documenting. We do not accuse, not yet." I nodded. That became my whole personality for the next 2 weeks. Document, smile, wait. Celia helped more than anyone except Eleanor. Every night after work, I'd come home, dump my bag on the chair, and call her. We'd go over what I'd found like we were running a very boring, very angry detective agency. One night she said, "You know what his mistake is, right?" "What?" "He thinks you're reacting emotionally. He has no idea you're reacting administratively." I laughed so hard I almost cried. Because that was exactly it. On June 12th, Martin went to Eleanor's office. He thought he was reviewing tax notices. Instead, Eleanor had a physician she trusted meet him there for a cognitive evaluation, completely within legal guidelines, completely documented, completely private. I sat in the waiting room with a cup of terrible office coffee and my grandmother's sugar bowl in my bag because I needed something that belonged to me in that moment. Martin came out 45 minutes later looking tired but clearer than I'd seen him in weeks. Eleanor asked him very gently whether anyone had been pressuring him to sign papers lately. He frowned. Then he said something that still makes my chest tight when I think about it. Vernon said I should let him handle things for a while, said I didn't need the stress. Eleanor nodded once. "Did you sign anything?" "No." "Did anyone ask you to?" Martin hesitated. "Yeah, he printed something. Said we'd talk about it later." There it was. Not confusion, not incapacity, pressure. The physician's evaluation went into the file that afternoon, stating Martin was oriented, capable, and able to manage his own affairs with support but without guardianship. That single document destroyed Vernon's entire conservatorship plan before he even knew it, but we still didn't move, because Eleanor said something that stuck with me. If we stop him now, he'll deny everything and retreat. If we let him keep going, he'll prove it himself. So we let him keep going. The next piece fell into place on June 18th. That was the day Vernon invited me to lunch. He picked a place on Highway 278 like this was some friendly family check-in. He ordered iced tea, talked about traffic, asked about my job, and then leaned back and said, very casually, "We should probably start talking about long-term planning for Martin." There it was again, planning. I said, "What do you mean?" He sighed like he hated having to be the responsible one. You know, simplifying things, getting paperwork in order, making sure the properties don't become a burden if his health gets worse. I nodded slowly. "And who would handle that?" I asked. He smiled. "I would, most likely. Denise and I are already there. It just makes sense." Makes sense. Of course it did. He pulled a folder from his bag. Inside were printed forms. Power of attorney, account authorization, property management agreement, not signed, not yet. He slid them toward me like he expected me to be relieved. "We just want everyone protected," he said. I looked at the papers. Then I looked at him. Again, I said the line that made him completely comfortable. "If that's what Martin wants, I trust you." He leaned back like he just won something. That was the moment I knew the trap had closed. Not because I said it, because he stepped into it himself. He thought he had time. He thought I had accepted it. He thought Martin was getting weaker. He thought the paperwork would happen quietly. He had no idea Eleanor already had the evaluation. No idea we had the account records. No idea the pharmacy notes were documented. No idea the conservatorship inquiry was on file. No idea I had photos of the medication labels. No idea Martin had told Eleanor about the pressure. He thought he was ahead. He was actually building the case against himself piece by piece. That night, I went home, put the folder on my kitchen table, and lined everything up. Photos, statements, dates, notes, copies. I opened my grandmother's sugar bowl and set the spare key next to the stack. Then I called Celia. "It's time," I said. She didn't ask what that meant. She just said, "Tell me when and where." Because the next step wasn't yelling. It wasn't exposing him in the kitchen. It wasn't a dramatic speech. It was going to happen in a room with witnesses, documents, and a man who thought he was about to take control of everything. And I was going to let him walk in smiling. He always liked being early to grab what wasn't his. This time, the table was already set. The dinner where everything finally broke open was Vernon's idea. That's still my favorite part. And he called Martin on June 21st and suggested we all get together that Sunday evening to talk about the future and make sure everyone felt comfortable with the direction things were going. He even said the words, "No pressure, just family." Whenever someone says no pressure, there's always pressure, usually paperwork too. Martin told him yes, not because he trusted him anymore, because Eleanor and I had already decided this was the moment we needed. We didn't want a hallway argument. We didn't want a phone call denial. We didn't want Vernon pretending later that nothing had happened. We wanted witnesses. We wanted documents. We wanted him confident enough to talk freely. Sunday, June 23rd, 6 p.m., at Martin's house in Bluffton. I remember the time because I wrote it on the top of my notebook in black pen, like it was a court date. All week, as I kept playing my part, I texted Denise asking if I should bring dessert. She replied with, "That would be lovely," which in Denise language meant she was feeling very in control. I baked a peach cobbler Saturday night just to stay in character. It came out slightly burnt on the edges because my brain was somewhere between legal strategy and homicide, but it looked homemade enough to sell the performance. Sunday afternoon, I stopped by Eleanor's office. One last time. She had everything ready in a thin leather folder that looked completely harmless unless you knew what was inside. Copies of the bank statements, the medication discrepancy notes, the pharmacy confirmation, the unsigned power of attorney template, the conservatorship inquiry record, the physician evaluation stating Martin was fully competent, and the most important thing, a new document Martin had signed 2 days earlier revoking any informal authority Vernon claimed to have and reaffirming Eleanor as his legal representative for all property matters. All clean, all legal, all dated. Eleanor handed me the folder and said, "You don't say anything until I do. Let him talk." I nodded. My grandmother used to say, "Give a liar enough rope and he'll start braiding it himself." That was the plan. At 5:48 p.m., I pulled into Martin's driveway with the cobbler on the passenger seat and my stomach doing slow, steady flips. Denise opened the door before I even knocked, smiling like she was hosting a fundraiser. "Oh, good, you made dessert?" "Of course I did." Inside, the dining table was already set. If Vernon had opened a bottle of red wine like this was some celebration instead of the worst decision of his life. Martin was sitting at the head of the table. He looked tired, but sharper than he had in weeks. His glasses were back, his legal pad was in front of him. That alone told me he was ready. We ate first. That was Vernon's mistake. He liked to feel relaxed before he made moves. He talked about real estate prices, the weather, some nonsense about property taxes going up. Denise kept refilling glasses like she was trying to keep the mood soft. I barely tasted the food. Celia's words kept running in my head. "He thinks you're reacting emotionally. He has no idea you're reacting administratively." At 6:32 p.m., Vernon pushed his plate back and said, "All right, maybe we should talk about the paperwork while we're all here." There it was, and Martin looked at him calmly. "What paperwork?" Vernon gave that patient sigh again, the one he used when he wanted to sound like the only adult in the room. "Just some things to make life easier, in case your health takes another turn, nothing dramatic." Nothing dramatic. He reached down beside his chair and pulled up the same folder he'd shown me at lunch. Power of attorney, account control forms, property authorization. He slid them across the table toward Martin. "I just want to make sure everything's protected," he said. "For Naomi, too. For everyone." He even looked at me when he said my name, like he expected gratitude. I kept my face neutral. Inside, my pulse was so loud I thought Denise could hear it. Martin picked up the first page and looked at it slowly. Then he set it down. I don't remember asking for this, he said. Vernon smiled, but the smile tightened a little. You didn't. I'm just trying to stay ahead of things. Martin didn't answer. That silence stretched long enough to make Denise shift in her chair. Then Vernon did exactly what Eleanor said he would do. He started talking more. You've been confused lately, Martin. The hospital even said your meds got mixed up. We just need someone handling things so nothing falls through the cracks. There it was, confused, handling things, exactly the language we needed him to say out loud. Martin looked at him for a long moment. Then he said very quietly, You think I can't manage my own affairs? Vernon raised both hands like he was being reasonable. I think you need help, that's all. And legally, we should have something in place before it becomes a problem. Legally. Perfect. But that was when Martin looked at me. Just 1 second, that was the signal. I reached down beside my chair, picked up my bag, and pulled out Eleanor's folder. Vernon's eyes flicked to it immediately. He didn't look worried yet, just curious. I placed the folder on the table in front of Martin. Martin slid it toward Vernon instead. You should read this first, he said. The room went very quiet. Vernon opened the folder. First page. The physician evaluation. I watched his eyes move. Second page. The revocation document. His jaw tightened. Third page. The bank statements. His fingers stopped. Denise leaned closer. What is that? He didn't answer. He turned another page. The pharmacy note. The conservatorship inquiry. The copy of the unsigned power of attorney template. His face went from pink to gray to something I can only describe as hollow. I had seen that look once before when a tenant realized Martin had the actual lease in his hand and not the story they'd been telling. Except this time it was family. What is this? Vernon said. His voice sounded wrong, thinner. Martin didn't raise his voice, not once. This, he said, is the reason you will not be handling anything for me. Denise grabbed the top page and started reading fast, like she could outpace the truth if she could move quick enough. This isn't... Vernon, what is this? Vernon looked at me then, not at Martin, at me. That was the moment he understood. You went behind my back, he said. I didn't flinch. I went around you, I said. There's a difference. His chair scraped back hard against the floor. You think you can just make things up? You think this proves anything? Eleanor stepped in then. She had been sitting quietly at the end of the table the whole time, and Vernon had been so focused on Martin he barely noticed her until she spoke. Actually, she said, calm as ever, it proves quite a lot. Vernon froze. Denise's mouth actually fell open. Eleanor slid one more document across the table. Mr. Hale, she said, this is a record of your inquiry about conservatorship dated May 21st. Would you like to explain why you began that process without Martin's knowledge? He didn't answer, because there was no good answer. She continued, like she was reading a grocery list. We also have unexplained withdrawals from the property account, documented medication inconsistencies, and unsigned authority forms you prepared yourself. Denise whispered. Oh, Vernon? He slammed his hand on the table. I was trying to help. Martin didn't even raise his voice. You were trying to take control. Silence. Heavy, ugly silence. Vernon looked at me again, and this time there was no smile. You set this up, he said. I shook my head slowly. No, I said, you did. That was the truth. Every withdrawal, every form, every lie, every conversation he thought nobody important was hearing. He built it himself. We just stopped protecting him. Denise started crying first, not loud, just that quiet, panicked crying people do when the story they believed stops working. We were just worried about you, she said to Martin. Martin looked at her for a long time. Then he said, worried people don't hide paperwork. Vernon grabbed the folder like he wanted to tear it in half. That then stopped because even he knew that wouldn't help. You're making a mistake, he said. Martin shook his head. No, he said. I already made one. I let you think my kindness meant I wouldn't notice. That hit harder than yelling ever could. Martin stood up slowly, one hand on the table. You need to leave, he said. Denise stared at him. What? You need to leave my house tonight. Vernon laughed once, sharp. You can't be serious. Martin looked straight at him. I am completely serious. No shouting, no drama, no scene. Just truth, sitting in the middle of the table where nobody could move it. Vernon looked at me one more time, like he was trying to figure out when he lost control. He lost it the moment he assumed I wouldn't notice. He lost it the moment he thought paperwork bored me. Yet he lost it the moment he believed kindness meant weakness. He pushed his chair back, grabbed Denise's purse off the counter, and walked toward the door without saying another word. Denise followed him, still crying. The front door shut hard enough to rattle the glass. And just like that, the house was quiet again. I stood there for a second, my hands shaking now that it was over. Martin sat back down slowly and rubbed his forehead. Then he looked at me and said the softest thing he'd said in weeks. "You kept your grandmother's lessons." I swallowed hard and nodded. "Yes, sir." He smiled just a little. "Good." That night, after Eleanor left and the dishes were still in the sink and the house finally felt like itself again, I picked up my bag, opened it, and took out the blue sugar bowl. I set it on the counter. Ed Martin looked at it and laughed quietly. "You still have that thing?" "Always," I said. He nodded. "Your grandmother was right about people." "Yeah, she really was. But the fallout? That took a lot longer than one dinner. People think the hard part ends when the truth comes out. It doesn't. That dinner was just the moment everything became visible. The real consequences took weeks. And they came one piece at a time, exactly the way my grandmother used to say they would. Wrong done slowly falls apart slowly. She told me once when I was about 14 and mad about something at school. You don't need to push it, just stop holding it up. That's exactly what happened to Vernon. We didn't chase him, we didn't call him, we didn't argue, we just stopped protecting him. The first thing he lost was access. The morning after the dinner, Eleanor filed the updated authority documents with the county records office. Martin signed everything in person, clear-headed, fully documented with the physician evaluation attached. Every property account was locked down. Every tenant was notified that payments were to go directly to the original trust account again. The bank flagged any withdrawal over $500 without Martin's direct approval. It took less than 48 hours. Vernon had spent weeks acting like he already owned everything. 2 signatures took it all back. The second thing he lost was credibility. When the conservatorship inquiry he started came back with the physician's report saying Martin was competent, the attorney he'd contacted dropped the case immediately. No drama, no lecture. Just a short, polite letter saying there was no legal basis to proceed. That kind of quiet rejection hurts more than yelling, because there's nothing to argue with. Denise called me 3 times that week. I didn't answer. She left 2 voicemails, both in that soft, trembling voice she used when she wanted sympathy. We were only trying to help. This didn't have to go this far. I listened to them once, saved them, and never responded. Celia told me, silence drives people like that insane. She was right. The third thing Vernon lost was money. Those withdrawals we documented? Eleanor sent a formal notice requesting explanation and repayment within 30 days. Not a threat, not an accusation, just a letter with dates, amounts, and copies of the statements. $4,800, $7,250, 2 separate maintenance charges with no invoices. If Vernon tried to say they were emergency repairs, Eleanor asked for receipts. He didn't have any. Funny how that works. He paid the money back in 2 installments before the deadline, which told us everything we needed to know. People don't rush to return money they had a right to take. After that, the distance became permanent. Vernon and Denise moved out within a week of the dinner. Not dramatically, not overnight. Just boxes, trips to the car, doors closing quietly. They didn't speak to Martin. They barely looked at me. The last thing Denise said to me was in the driveway while she was loading a suitcase. "You always thought you were smarter than everyone." I looked at her and said, "No, I just write things down." She didn't have an answer for that. Martin got stronger after they left. Not all at once. Not like a movie. Just little things. His voice steadier, his handwriting back to normal, his appetite better. The doctor adjusted his medications properly once we knew exactly what he was actually taking, and his blood pressure stopped jumping all over the place. One afternoon in July, he walked out to the porch by himself carrying his coffee, sat down in his old chair, and said, "House feels different." It did. Quieter, honest, like it belonged to him again. I moved into the guest room for a while to help during recovery, and that turned into me staying longer than planned. Not because I had to, because I wanted to. We got back into routines, morning walks around the block, rent checks on the kitchen table, baseball on the TV with the volume too loud. Normal things, the kind of things that feel boring until you almost lose them. Celia still came over every Friday night with takeout and opinions. She'd sit at the counter, halm by the counter, eating lo mein out of the carton, and say things like, he really thought he had this. And I'd say, he almost did, because that's the truth nobody likes to admit. If I hadn't started writing things down, if Renata hadn't said anything at the hospital, if Eleanor hadn't taken me seriously, if Celia hadn't told me to stop explaining their behavior, he might have gotten away with it. Not because he was smarter, because he was confident. And confidence can do a lot of damage when nobody checks it. About a month later, Martin handed me a small envelope at the kitchen table. Inside was the spare key to the file cabinet in the den. You keep this now, he said. You sure? I asked. He nodded. You notice things. That might be the nicest compliment anyone's ever given me. I put that key in my bag next to the blue sugar bowl lid I still carry when I travel. And I thought about my grandmother again. She used to sit at her table every morning with her coffee in one hand and the newspaper in the other, reading slow, like nothing in the world could rush her. One day I asked her why she never got worked up when people disappointed her. She said, because I don't argue with what people show me. I just adjust where they sit in my life. That line saved me more than once. Vernon still lives in the same county. I hear things sometimes. Small business that didn't work out. A move to a smaller place. Denise not talking to half the family anymore because she says everyone took sides. Nobody asked me what happened, and I don't volunteer it. Not because I'm protecting him, because I don't need to explain something the paperwork already settled. Martin's doing well now. Slower, but steady. We still sit on the porch in the evening sometimes with iced tea, watching the sun go down over the marsh like we've got nowhere else to be. Last week he looked over at me and said, "Your grandmother would have been proud of you." I laughed a little and said, "She would have told me to keep copies." He laughed too. And that was it. No big speech, no victory moment, just peace. Which honestly is better. If there's anything I learned from all of this, it's this. Pay attention when people start making decisions for you without asking. Pay attention when paperwork appears before conversations. Pay attention when someone tells you not to worry instead of answering your question. And most of all, never assume kindness makes you safe. Sometimes it just makes you convenient. Write things down, keep copies, ask questions, and don't confront a lie until you have enough truth that the room goes quiet when it hits the table. If you've ever had a moment where someone thought you wouldn't notice, put the word receipts in the comments. I read more of them than you think. Thank you so much for watching. More of my most gripping stories are already on your screen. Click one now and don't miss the best part. You will love it. See you in the next.